In April 1995, Thomas Edward Benning entered Black Cave in Arizona alone. He was no stranger to the cave. He'd explored it several times before. Confident but underprepared, he relied only on a miner's lamp and his memory of the cave's layout. The entrance led to a wide chamber he knew well. But this time, instead of following the main route, he veered into a side passage, one he'd never taken. It was tighter, darker, and more complex. For nearly an hour, he crawled and climbed through winding tunnels until it hit him. He was lost in a cave. He tried retracing his steps, but every passage looked the same. The maze had closed around him. And then his lamp began to flicker. Panic set in. Moments later, his only source of light went out, plunging him into total darkness. No sunlight, no landmarks, just silence and stone. Alone, trapped underground, Thomas reached for a last option: matches. Each tiny flame flared against the darkness, lighting just enough to glimpse the tunnel walls around him. One match at a time, he moved, hoping to stumble on a familiar turn. But the matches burned fast. One by one, they disappeared into smoke. Then he struck the last one. It burned out, and Thomas was left in absolute blackness, deep beneath the surface, with no light and no way forward. But Thomas didn't stop. He couldn't. He crawled blind, feeling along the walls, desperate for anything that might lead him out. To mark his path, he tore what little he had: his insole, a trash bag, strips of clothing, leaving a trail in the dark. This real cave survival story was now driven by instinct. By the time he reached a narrow fissure, his body was failing. Starved, dehydrated, and running on instinct alone, he kept pushing forward. His matches were gone. The darkness was total, so complete he couldn't tell if his eyes were open. Still he moved. Then he felt it, a crack in the rock about 4 feet deep, narrow, tight. But maybe it was a way out. Maybe it led to a chamber or even back toward the entrance. That flicker of hope pulled him in. He slid feet first into the fissure, trying to ease himself down carefully, feeling for a ledge. But as his hips dropped past the tightest point, everything changed. He got stuck. The stone clamped around him, hips jammed, arms pressed tight. The walls held him in place like a vice. He tried pushing up, but he had no leverage. He kicked, trying to break free, but the harder he fought, the deeper he slipped. The cave exploration gone wrong had turned into a deadly trap.
The jagged rock dug into his sides. Every movement stole more strength. Panic crept in, but it had nowhere to go. He was alone, trapped in a stone coffin, wedged too tightly to breathe freely, too far in to escape. The cave had him now. Thomas was trapped, and there was no way out. His arms, drained from hours of crawling, had nothing left to give. He clawed at the stone, fingers trembling, nails scraping uselessly against the jagged walls. His legs were pinned. His body, once full of purpose, was now locked in place by the cave that had lured him in. He tried to shout, but his voice, hoarse and weak, vanished into the dense silence. No echo, no answer, just stillness. He was utterly alone. This Arizona cave tragedy was unfolding in total darkness. Hours passed, then days. No one knew where to look. He hadn't told anyone which cave he'd entered. His wife, alarmed when he didn't return, called the police. They searched every cave he'd ever explored, but there were no signs, nothing. It took days just to find his car parked near Black Cave, Arizona. Rescue teams arrived quickly after that, but they were working blind. The cave's mapped paths offered no answers. They searched the main chambers, the usual turns. Near the entrance, they found his sunglasses, then his shirt, but they missed the small side passage, the one Thomas had chosen that day. They scoured every known section, unaware they were just a few wrong turns from where he was actually trapped. Meanwhile, deep below, Thomas lay wedged in darkness. His breathing had slowed to shallow gasps. The cold gnawed at his body. Hunger faded into numbness. His mind drifted between reality and dream, lost in the blur of exhaustion. Above ground, time moved on. The rescue effort stalled. No new clues. Eventually, they called it off. The caver disappears. Thomas Edward Benning was officially declared missing, but he hadn't vanished. He was still there, in the silent black, held by the earth, waiting for help that never came. Then, in December 1996, over a year and a half later, 3 cavers, Bill Graff, Elizabeth Robb, and Dale Green, entered Black Cave. They weren't looking for Thomas, they were simply mapping uncharted sections. That day, they chose a lesser-known route, the same one Thomas had taken. An hour in, they found something odd, a burned matchbook in the dirt, then a broken miner's lamp, torn cloth, more used matchsticks. The clues were scattered like breadcrumbs marking a desperate path in the dark. A terrifying cave story was beginning to unfold. At first, they thought little of it, maybe leftovers from an old expedition. But on their return trip, something gnawed at their curiosity. They decided to check the side tunnel near where they'd found the scraps. It was barely 3 feet wide, a low, claustrophobic crawl space. Pushing through, Rob spotted a shoe, then a sock, and a little further in, something strange on the cave floor. It looked like a bundle of fur. She moved closer. It wasn't fur. They froze. Horror settled in as the light from their headlamps revealed what they'd found. The body was wedged into a crack, twisted and still, partially mummified by the cold air. Time had reduced it to little more than bone, skin, and cloth. But the clues around it, the torn bag, the empty matchbook, and the familiar miner's lamp, told the story clearly. It was Thomas Edward Benning. Trapped. Alone. Lost underground for over 600 days. A final chapter in a quiet disappearance and the grim reality of what lies beyond the last match struck underground. They had found him. Thomas Edward Benning, the man lost nearly 2 years ago, lay wedged in stone, his remains preserved by the cold silence of Black Cave. The cavers were stunned. They'd heard the name, seen the flyers, known the story. Now here he was, buried in shadows no rescue team had ever reached. They took photos of the scene and retrieved a set of keys for identification. On the rock nearby, they noticed deep claw marks, evidence of Thomas's final struggle. He had fought until the end, scraping at the walls that refused to let him go. Before leaving, they placed reflective markers to mark the path and made their way back to the surface.
He had been trapped for 20 months in the same cave he once explored with confidence. Had the original search teams known about the hidden tunnel, had they called in local cavers who knew the route, maybe things would have ended differently. But no one found him, not in time. This true survival story ended in silence, not rescue. Black Cave kept its secret for nearly 2 years, until the day chance, not search teams, finally revealed what it had hidden so well. Too late for rescue, just in time for a story no one would ever forget.
This next story is far more devastating than the first.
On June 18, 1990, Gary Lutz took his 2 sons, 13-year-old Gary Jr. and 9-year-old Timothy, on a cave exploration trip in New Trout Cave, West Virginia. It was meant to be a bonding adventure. Gary, a caver with over 20 years of experience, wanted to share his passion with his boys who were new to exploring underground. They came prepared, hard hats, knee pads, and carbide lamps. Confident in their gear and Gary's expertise, they entered the cave. The early passages posed no trouble. They admired the massive big room, its high ceiling and wide floor offering a sense of awe. After a short snack break, they pressed on into the maze, a twisting section filled with tight crawls, narrow ledges, and confusing turns. This part tested them. The tight spaces were exhausting, but Gary's steady leadership kept the boys moving. As they reached an 8-foot drop, he made a decision to leave their pack behind. It held extra food, water, and their only backup lights. But the carbide lamps had been refueled moments earlier, and he figured they'd be back long before those ran out. It seemed like a reasonable call at the time, but the cave had other plans, as this real cave disaster was about to unfold. Roughly 200 feet into the maze, Timothy's light began to flicker. What started as a minor issue became serious when it died completely. Gary stayed calm, telling the boys they'd turn back, but then Gary Jr.'s lamp failed too. Darkness began creeping in. The cave shadows deepened. Gary's own light flickered, still barely holding on. The boys stayed close as he pushed forward, trying to retrace their route. But the maze, with its endless twists and mirrored paths, disoriented them quickly. Every turn led to dead ends or unfamiliar corners. Then, Gary's lamp gave out. Total darkness. No sense of space, no bearings, just blackness pressing in from all sides. The air felt tighter. Sounds of dripping water echoed eerily. Gary could hear his sons breathing, shaky, scared.
Then the question came. "Dad, are we lost?" Gary paused. His heart pounded, but he couldn't show fear. He had to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help. His mind raced, trying to reconstruct the path in reverse. But every step now was blind, every decision a gamble. The cave had swallowed them whole. It was now a full-blown cave survival story.
Trapped in the black depths of the maze, Gary weighed their options. Crawling back to the pack blindly was too risky. They had no way of knowing which way to go. He gathered spent carbide from their lamps, scraped together a few remaining pellets, and did something desperate. Using urine in the water chamber, he managed to get one lamp working. Crude, but effective. The faint glow gave them just enough light to move. They found a small chamber to rest in. Gary set his sons on their knee pads to conserve heat. The flickering lamp lit their tired faces. He tried to comfort them, but the reality was grim. No one knew they were inside New Trout Cave. Their parked car offered no clues. He hadn't told anyone their plans. Minutes crawled by, then hours. The weak flame finally sputtered out, plunging them back into darkness. The cave's 54-degree air began leaching warmth from their bodies. They huddled together in the silence, muscles stiffening, teeth chattering. There was no food, no water. The soot-covered walls, remnants of old nitrate mining, coated the air with dust, scratching their throats and stinging their lungs. Time had stopped. All they could do now was wait. This true cave rescue story was just beginning to unfold. Outside the cave, concern finally surfaced by Wednesday. A local noticed the trio's car hadn't moved in days and alerted state police. Investigators reached out to Florida authorities and eventually contacted Gary's family. They confirmed he'd planned a caving trip in Pendleton County, but had no idea which Trout Rock cave he had entered. Inside, hope was fading. Gary and his sons were growing weaker by the hour. Dehydration was setting in. Every breath felt like sandpaper, their throats raw from the cave's dusty air. Huddled together in the freezing dark, fear pressed in from all sides. Gary wrestled with guilt. He had broken key safety rules. No note left behind, no backup lights, no extra provisions. With decades of caving experience, he knew better. But now, none of it mattered. His sons were suffering, and there was nothing he could do.
Gary held them close, offering quiet words of comfort. All three prayed for a miracle, just one chance to make it out alive. By Friday morning, the Lutz family had been trapped in New Trout Cave for nearly 5 days. The rescue operation had escalated, drawing in multiple cave rescue teams and emergency responders. But after so long without food, water, or warmth, hope was fading. The cold, damp environment made survival unlikely. Then, searchers found the Lutz pack deep in the maze. For a moment, hope flared, but its position suggested the family had pushed even farther into the confusing network of passages, likely disoriented in total darkness. The mood among rescuers shifted. Quietly, one said to another, "We're probably looking for fatalities." A real-life cave rescue story had turned into a race against time. Rescuers crawled through the tightest gaps, calling names into the void, their voices bouncing off stone walls with no reply. Every turn led to more rock, more dead ends. The deeper they went, the more convinced they became that they were too late. The maze was brutal. Sharp limestone scraped at hands and knees. Passages were so narrow they had to slide on their bellies, helmets grinding against jagged ceilings. Dust filled the air, stirred by every movement. As the rescue team pushed deeper into the cave, one member suddenly stopped. He tilted his head, listening. A faint broken voice echoed from somewhere ahead. At first he thought he imagined it. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The team froze. Silence. Then again, a weak cry for help. They looked at each other in disbelief. Could someone still be alive after 5 days in darkness without food, water, or near freezing cold? Without hesitation, they surged forward, calling out. The voice answered, stronger now. They were close. Then their headlamps lit up the chamber ahead, and there they were. Gary Lutz was slumped against the cave wall, his arms around his sons. His face was gaunt, his lips cracked and bleeding. Gary Jr. and Timothy lay beside him, barely conscious, trembling from cold and exhaustion. They had survived. Just barely. The rescuers rushed to them. Relief and urgency flooded the room. It was a miracle.
Rescuers quickly assessed the family's condition. Gary Jr. and Timothy were hypothermic and severely dehydrated. Timothy, just 9, was barely responsive, his body limp and fading. Gary Sr. was conscious but disoriented, his voice raw from days without water. The team feared they might not survive the journey out. They radioed the surface. Medics needed to be ready. This was now a dramatic cave rescue, one of the most harrowing true survival stories ever to come out of West Virginia. Extraction wouldn't be easy. The same narrow passages that had trapped the family now stood between them and rescue. Timothy was strapped into a stretcher, unable to move on his own. 2 rescuers rotated carrying him, inching through the tight stone corridors. Gary Jr., slightly more stable, still needed support. A rescuer held him steady, whispering encouragement as they moved. Gary Sr. insisted on walking, but his body gave out repeatedly. 2 team members stayed beside him, catching him each time he stumbled. Every step was critical. Timothy's breaths came in short, uneven gasps. Gary Jr. drifted in and out of awareness. Gary Sr.'s glassy eyes showed the toll of the ordeal. He was fading. But they kept moving, driven by hope and the sheer will to survive. After hours of grueling effort, the team finally emerged from the cave. Sunlight hit their eyes like a shock, blinding after so long in darkness. Medics rushed in. Gary Jr. and Timothy were wrapped in blankets and placed on stretchers. IVs were started immediately. Their young bodies were fragile, but they were alive. Gary Sr., though able to walk, was quickly sedated. Oxygen and water were handed to him. His hands trembled as he gripped the bottle, only now beginning to grasp what they had endured. All odds, the Lutz family had survived, and in the quiet after the storm, that fact alone felt like a miracle, a real cave survival story that would be told for years to come.
Ellison's cave isn't just any hole in the ground. It's an underground cathedral for vertical cavers, a vast tiered system of massive drops and intricate passages tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Its claim to fame? The Big Four pits, 4 massive vertical shafts that challenge even the most seasoned experts. The deepest and most infamous is the Incredible Pit, 440 feet straight down. On Tuesday, March 10, 1999, 3 experienced cavers, Hal Bufford, Chris Andrews, and Anthony Bates, began their descent. Hal, at 28, was known for his love of these deep challenges. They weren't rookies. They had planned this for weeks, meticulously checking gear and weather. The goal? Conquer the Incredible Pit and explore the subterranean world at its base. The first parts of the cave are like an underground staircase. You start with a series of smaller, manageable drops, an 80-foot pit, then a tight sequence leading to another drop of 83 feet. Eventually, they reached the massive black mouth of the Incredible Pit. This is where the physics of the cave changes. Into this vast hole pours a significant stream of water. It falls the entire 440 feet, creating a non-stop waterfall that turns the pit into a freezing, turbulent gauntlet. A genuine cave diving disaster waiting to happen if you lose focus. They had 2 ropes spanning the void. One was a thicker half-inch line already left by a prior team. The second was the thinner 7/16 inch rope they'd brought and rigged themselves. 2 lines, hanging close, whipping gently in the air current generated by the falling water. This small detail, having 2 ropes nearby, would prove to be the single most devastating factor later that night. The descent began. It was a freezing baptism. Each man was immediately battered by the cascade, the water feeling like needles on exposed skin. Chris and Anthony were smart. They wore specialized wetsuits. Hal, unfortunately, had less adequate gear, a light plastic rainsuit layered over cotton and denim. Cotton is a killer in these conditions, offering 0 insulation once saturated. The water leached the heat from him from the moment he started. After the long, grueling descent, they reached the bottom, a strange, silent world, massive in scale. They spent time exploring the lower passages, admiring the geological wonders, the stalactites and flowstone formations, all sculpted by the very water that had just tried to freeze them solid. It was a brief moment of quiet triumph and exploration. The easy part was over. Climbing out of a 440-foot shaft, especially a wet one, is an exhausting marathon.
It's a full-body workout that tests everything: muscle, gear, and will. Chris was first, then Anthony. Slowly, painstakingly, they hauled themselves up the rope, emerging into the small space at the lip, soaked and absolutely spent. They were relieved, but not finished. Hal was still down there. It was almost 11:30 p.m. when Hal started his climb. Communication was impossible. The relentless roar of the falling water drowned out any shouts. The only sign of his progress was the rhythmic rising glow of his headlamp far below. Chris and Anthony watched, reassured by the steady upward movement. Everything seemed normal. Around midnight, the rhythm broke. Hal's lamp stopped its ascent. A few moments passed, then a few more. Then they heard it, a sound barely audible over the deafening cascade, muffled, frantic cries. It took Chris a moment to recognize the voice. Hal. He was shouting for help. Chris leaned out dangerously, using his powerful lamp to penetrate the mist. There, about 150 feet below the rim, Hal was dangling. His body was swinging erratically, his movements panicked. He was gesturing wildly, a clear sign of distress. They watched as his mouth opened and closed, his pleas for help instantly erased by the water. He was trapped. Why didn't his friends go down to help him? Because descending was not an option. The rope was already stressed by Hal's weight. Any secondary accident, a slip or a fall on a compromised line, would turn a dire situation into a double catastrophe. They were frozen by grim reality. All they could do was watch their friends struggle in the terrifying black chasm. The sheer helplessness was overwhelming.
So what exactly happened to Hal 150 feet up? The problem was simple yet deadly: rope tangle. When two ropes hang this close in a pit, they can easily twist together under the strain of a climber. Hal was using ascenders, devices designed to grip the rope and allow a caver to climb up. But he was on the half-inch rope, using ascenders meant for the smaller 7/16 line. This difference created massive friction, slowing him down, exhausting him, and complicating every movement. Exhausted and freezing, Hal attempted a desperate, complex switch to stop climbing and start rappelling down. This maneuver requires focus and precision. In his fatigue and panic, he got his gear hopelessly crossed. Both of his ascenders were still locked onto the ropes, under his full weight, while his rappelling device, a rappel rack, was only partially set up. He was now stuck, unable to ascend, unable to descend. The clock was ticking, and the environment was his executioner. Hal was soaked to the bone. The frigid water from the waterfall slammed into him relentlessly. His cotton clothes were a liability, pulling his body heat away at an alarming rate. He was developing severe hypothermia. His breathing became shallow, his jaw clenched against the violent shivers. He tried to re-rig, but the cold had stolen the fine motor control from his fingers. His grips were failing. Time was running out. For Chris and Anthony, the moment of painful realization came quickly. Hal's flailing had become weak. His shouts had faded to silence. They couldn't help him. Their single, grim option was to get out and call for help. They navigated the treacherous passages of Ellison's cave as fast as they could, battling the 80 and 83-foot upward climbs and the slippery, winding tunnels. By 2:30 a.m., they burst out into the cool Georgia night air and reached Walker County 911. The news instantly triggered a massive cave rescue operation. Experienced vertical cavers, emergency responders from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and dozens of dedicated volunteers began mobilizing. The mission was terrifyingly simple: save Hal Bufford. The rescuers were fast, but the cave is vast and unforgiving. It wasn't until 9 a.m. the next morning, nearly 9 hours after Hal first cried out, that the first rescue team reached the lip of the incredible pit. 9 hours of relentless cold and exhaustion. A rescuer shouted Hal's name into the churning abyss. Only the unrelenting roar of the waterfall answered. They rigged a hauling system, a complex network of pulleys and ropes designed to lift a human out of the shaft. Two rescuers began their slow, cautious descent. They reached the 150-foot mark. There, they found Hal. He was hanging motionless in his harness, a limp figure wedged between the two tangled ropes. His head was slumped, his body pale and frighteningly cold. Hal Bufford had died hours earlier. The freezing water, exacerbated by his inadequate cotton clothing, caused severe hypothermia, but the cause of death was compounded by a cruel secondary factor: positional asphyxia. His harness, which should have been his salvation, became a killer. Hanging motionless, trapped by the gear, the harness restricted blood flow and compressed his lungs. Late Wednesday evening, Hal's body finally emerged from the mouth of the incredible pit, out of the dark and into the daylight. More than 60 people participated in the complex, full-scale effort, a testament to the community of cavers and responders. Hal Bufford's death was a profound shock, the first fatality in the history of Ellison's cave. It remains a stark reminder that even for the most prepared adventurers, a small gear mistake, a sudden equipment failure, or a simple choice of inadequate clothing can turn a challenging climb into a fatal cave diving disaster.
In this next story, a young explorer ignored every warning and pushed forward, only to end up trapped beneath a massive boulder, with the passage sealed shut behind her.
The morning of October 14th, 2003, began like many crisp autumn days in the Adirondack foothills of upstate New York. Blackthorn Caverns, a sprawling limestone cave system just outside the small town of Redwood Hollow, had long been a magnet for local explorers eager to experience its twisting passages and underground chambers. At around 10:30 a.m., 5 friends, Daniel Mercer, Brian Holt, Rachel Lynn, Mark DeVries, and Hannah Ivers, arrived at the cave entrance. Their group was a mix of experienced spelunkers and curious newcomers. The air outside was chilly, hovering around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, 9 degrees Celsius, but inside they knew the cave would hold steady at about 52 degrees Fahrenheit, 11 degrees Celsius, the constant underground temperature. They were prepared: helmets with mounted lights, spare flashlights, water, light snacks, and sturdy boots. The more experienced members carried small packs with first aid supplies and ropes. Before entering, they carefully signed the caverner's register, a safety log that listed who had gone inside and when they were expected back. At about 11 a.m., the group stepped into the yawning black entrance. The first chamber was large enough to stand in, but quickly the passages narrowed. They chose to explore the dry route first, working their way through crawling sections and small chambers. Spirits were high as they marveled at formations and underground streams. After nearly 2 hours underground, they gathered in a larger chamber known locally as the Crossroads, a meeting point where several passages split off. The space was about the size of a classroom, with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. From here, narrow tunnels snaked off in several directions. It was here that things took a tragic turn. Among the many openings leading out of the Crossroads was a dark slit in the wall that locals called the Stone Gate. It was a forbidden path, marked with loose rock and unstable boulders. The danger was well known. Several collapses had occurred there in the past, and experienced cavers avoided it. But Hannah Ivers, the smallest in the group and eager to explore, didn't recognize the danger. The entrance looked like just another crawl space. Without hesitation, she slipped into the narrow gap, determined to see where it led. Her friends shouted after her, but before they could follow, disaster struck. Just as Hannah passed through the entrance, a low rumble shook the passage. Several large boulders shifted and tumbled down, crashing into the gap behind her. Dust filled the air as the rock slammed into place, completely sealing the stone gate shut. Panic set in. The others rushed to the blocked passage, calling her name. From the other side, Hannah could faintly hear them, but her path forward was now the only way through. The irony was cruel. The stone gate wasn't a dead end. Though dangerous, it eventually looped back to connect with the main safe passage further ahead. But Hannah didn't know this. She crawled onward, flashlight trembling against the jagged limestone. The crawl grew tighter as she pushed forward on hands and knees. Then, near the forbidden passage curved to rejoin the main tunnel, the ceiling shifted again. Without warning, a massive boulder broke loose. It crashed down onto Hannah, striking her side and pinning her helplessly against the stone floor. Her cry of pain echoed through the dark corridor before fading to shallow gasps. Back at the blockade, her friends clawed desperately at the rockfall, trying to move stones that were far too heavy by hand. Hours dragged by as they failed to clear even a fraction of the collapse.
They believed it was the only way to reach her, unaware that if they had simply continued down the main passage for another 200 feet, they might have stumbled right upon her. At 1:45 p.m., Brian Holt made the painful decision to exit the cave and call for help. By 2:30 p.m., local firefighters, EMTs, and a specialized cave rescue unit were on scene. Equipped with chisels, hammers, and drills, rescuers began working at the rockfall, while medics prepared for the possibility of hypothermia and crush injuries. Inside the cave, the trapped girl's situation worsened. Pinned under the boulder, Hannah's breathing was shallow. The cold limestone floor sapped her body heat, and the weight of the stone pressed mercilessly against her chest and legs. She drifted in and out of consciousness, alone in the dark. By 6 p.m., rescuers had made little progress at the collapsed entrance. It was then that a veteran caver, James Corbett, suggested exploring the main passage further ahead. He said, "If that route loops back, she may be closer than we think." At 6:40 p.m., Corbett and 2 others crawled deeper into the main tunnel. Their hunch proved right. Just minutes later, their headlamps illuminated a heartbreaking sight. Hannah, pinned beneath a massive slab of limestone, her helmet light flickering weakly against the cave wall. She was still, her breathing faint and irregular. Rescuers rushed to her side, but the stone that pinned her was enormous, wedged tightly by surrounding rock. For the next 2 hours, they worked frantically with chisels and pry bars, slowly breaking away fragments. Dust choked the passage as they fought to free her. By 9:15 p.m., they finally shifted enough weight to pull her free, but it was too late. Hannah had succumbed to her injuries sometime during the long, agonizing wait. Wrapped in blankets, her body was carefully carried out of the cave, emerging into the cold night air at 10:30 p.m., almost 12 hours after the group had first entered. The tragedy left the small community shaken. Local caving experts later stressed how preventable it had been. The stone gate had been marked as dangerous for years. If the group had realized sooner that the path rejoined the main passage, Hannah might have been found hours earlier while she was still alive. Instead, the Blackthorn Caverns accident became a sobering reminder of the unforgiving nature of caves. One wrong turn, one misplaced stone, and adventure can become tragedy.
March 1st, 2012. A clear Kentucky afternoon. 8 teenagers and their teacher stood at the entrance of Hidden River Cave, ready for a 3-hour off-trail tour, one that would take them into parts of the cave few ever see. Hidden River Cave isn't a tourist-friendly cavern with lights and railings. It's a vast, winding system of underground passages, dark, unpredictable, and shaped by an underground river cutting through its lower levels. The group was young, excited, and mostly inexperienced. Their teacher had planned the trip as a hands-on lesson about geology and underground life. It was supposed to be safe, educational, memorable. They entered with headlamps and basic gear, confident that nothing could go wrong. The sun was out, the weather seemed perfect, but caves don't follow surface rules. Their guide led them deeper, through narrow tunnels, across slick rock, and into wide chambers. With every step, they left the safety of the surface further behind. The light faded, the temperature dropped. The cave seemed calm, still. But Hidden River Cave had its own plans. By the time they reached the 1.5-mile mark inside Hidden River Cave, the group had crossed into a world completely detached from the surface. No cell signals, no outside sounds, only rock, darkness, and the faint beams of their headlamps. Their only lifeline was the guide who brought them in. But above ground, the weather was changing fast. As the group explored the cave's deepest chambers, a powerful storm system began forming overhead. A supercell, capable of unleashing massive rainfall in a matter of minutes, was building strength. What began as a few scattered drops quickly escalated into a torrential downpour. Streams overflowed, roads began to flood, and all of that water was heading toward one place: Hidden River Cave. Deep underground, the teenagers and their teacher had no idea what was happening. They continued exploring cave formations and learning about underground ecosystems, unaware that millions of gallons of rainwater were surging into the cave behind them. Caves like Hidden River Cave act like giant funnels. Every drop of rain on the surface eventually finds a path underground, through cracks, sinkholes, and open channels. And once it starts pouring in, it doesn't take long for the lower chambers to fill. The group was about to find themselves trapped in one of the most dangerous places imaginable during a flash flood.
During normal weather, this creates the gentle underground streams that make caves so beautiful. During violent storms, it creates killer floods that can fill entire cave systems in minutes. Such was the terrifying case during the Hidden River Cave flooding. Hidden River Cave's executive director, David Foster, and guide Joe Forsyth were monitoring conditions from above ground when they realized the severity of the situation. The peaceful underground river they knew so well was transforming into a monster. This marked the beginning of one of the most intense underground cave flood rescue efforts ever undertaken in Kentucky. Foster and Forsyth measured the water level and watched in horror as it climbed rapidly, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet deep, and still rising with frightening speed. Underground flooding doesn't behave like surface flooding. There's nowhere for the water to spread out, so it concentrates in the cave passages with tremendous force. This is why supercell storm cave disasters can be so deadly for anyone caught below. Foster and Forsyth faced an agonizing decision. The safe choice was to wait above ground and hope the group could find high ground inside the cave. But they knew the cave's layout. There weren't many places 1.5 miles deep where 9 people could escape rising floodwater. If they were going to save these people, they had to act immediately before the water levels made rescue impossible. The 2 experienced cave explorers made the kind of split-second decision that separates heroes from bystanders. They gathered emergency rescue equipment and plunged into the flooded cave, fighting against torrents of muddy water that grew stronger with every step. Their bravery during the Hidden River Cave emergency would later be recognized by the caving community worldwide. Forsyth and Foster had to feel their way along walls and ceiling formations, often moving through chest-deep water that threatened to knock them off their feet.
Meanwhile, 1.5 miles, 2.4 kilometers deeper in the cave, the group was beginning to realize something was terribly wrong. The gentle underground stream they had been following was now a rushing torrent. Water levels were rising visibly, and the sound of flowing water had changed from a peaceful babble to an ominous roar. The 9 trapped individuals found themselves in every cave explorer's worst nightmare scenario. The passages they had used to enter were now filled with fast-moving water. Their headlamps illuminated a scene of underground chaos, muddy torrents rushing through spaces that had been dry hours earlier. The teenagers huddled together with their teacher on whatever high ground they could find, watching the water level creep higher. Some were crying. Others sat in stunned silence, realizing they might die tonight. Flooding cave disasters often strike with little warning, and survival depends entirely on swift decisions and luck. The teacher tried to maintain calm and keep the group together, but the reality of their situation was becoming undeniable. Their safe route out was gone, potentially forever. Even if the rain stopped immediately, it could take hours or days for water levels to recede enough for safe passage. The group pressed themselves against the highest walls they could find, but the water kept rising. What had started as ankle-deep flooding was now knee-deep, then waist-deep. In the narrow confines of the cave passages, even a few more inches could mean the difference between survival and drowning. Underground rescue missions in such conditions often become races against time and nature. Meanwhile, Foster and Forsyth pushed deeper into the flooded cave, trusting a hunch. Based on their experience in the group's original path, they had a good idea where the trapped group might be. It was a gamble, but it was all they had. After battling through 1.5 miles, 2.4 kilometers of cold, rising water and relentless currents, Forsyth finally spotted them. Huddled together on a narrow ledge, 9 terrified people clung to the slick limestone walls. The teenagers were trembling, soaked to the bone, eyes wide with fear. Their teacher did his best to keep them calm, masking his panic as he silently wondered how much longer they could last. There was no going back. The main passage was completely submerged now, an underwater tunnel of death. But Forsyth had an advantage. He knew this cave better than almost anyone. Hidden River Cave had alternate paths, dangerous and rarely used, but they existed, and they might be the only way out.
He quickly secured a safety line around his waist, then had each person grab hold of the rope. What came next was a journey none of them would ever forget, a terrifying escape through pitch-black corridors, chest-deep in frigid water, forced to swim through submerged tunnels with no room for error. The route Forsyth chose wasn't meant for rescues. It was a last resort path, one few people dared attempt even in perfect conditions. But on that night, with the cave feeling like a sealed bottle, it was their only shot at survival. They had to squeeze through gaps barely wider than their own bodies, scraping against jagged rock as they inched forward. Slippery flowstone formations loomed ahead, forcing them to climb with trembling limbs while icy water surged below. In some places, the ceiling dropped so low they were forced onto their hands and knees, crawling through freezing currents that threatened to pull them under. More than once, a teenager lost their footing, feet swept out from under them by the relentless flood, but the safety line connecting them to Forsyth held fast. It was their lifeline. The water was bone-chilling, thick with mud, and littered with branches and debris torn from the surface. Every step was a desperate battle, not just against the cave, but against panic. Time blurred. The narrow, winding route felt endless, but Forsyth pressed on, his knowledge of the cave becoming their only hope. Finally, after what felt like hours navigating the submerged labyrinth, the terrain began to rise. The water receded, the walls widened, the ceiling lifted. They had made it to higher ground. From there, the group followed dry tunnels, passages that remained untouched by the floodwaters until a sliver of light marked the path to safety. Not the same entrance they'd come through, but a forgotten exit only Forsyth knew existed. When they finally emerged from the depths of Hidden River Cave, their bodies were trembling from exhaustion and cold, their minds from shock. The teenagers collapsed onto the muddy earth outside, some sobbing, others too numb to process what had just happened. But they were alive. All 9 had survived what easily could have become a tragedy. The storm that had trapped them was finally starting to pass, yet the cave behind them remained flooded, sealed off even now by water. The main passages were still impassable, confirming what Forsyth knew from the beginning. The hidden route had been their only way out.
This next tragedy was caused by a sudden argument between the explorers, leading to a devastating tragedy.
April 26, 1982. 21-year-old James May saw the world as his to conquer. Arrogant, overconfident, and unwilling to back down from any challenge, he set his sights on Hookako Cave near the Cave of the Winds in Colorado. James's bride was his driving force and his greatest flaw. Friends knew how quickly his temper flared and how hard his ego was to bruise. That Saturday morning, he led the way with his usual swagger, convinced the cave would be no match for him. Dressed in a shirt and jeans, knee pads strapped on, and 3 flashlights in hand, he carried no food or water. Extra batteries in his pocket were, in his mind, all he needed. His friends followed quietly, perhaps wary of where his confidence might lead. Deep inside the cave, tension snapped. In the cold, narrow passages, a heated argument erupted. Words were lost to time, but the result was unmistakable. James, boiling with anger, turned to his companions. "Leave me! I'll find my own way out!" he shouted. His pride wouldn't let him back down, and so they left him. His companions, worn down by his temper, took him at his word. Maybe they thought he'd catch up, humbled. Maybe they hoped the cold darkness would teach him a lesson. Either way, they left. Alone in the belly of the earth, James believed he was still in control. He clicked on his flashlight and pressed deeper into the cave, pride keeping fear at bay. At first, solitude felt like victory, but the further he went, the more the shadows stretched, and the louder his footsteps echoed back at him. Hours slipped away. The path to daylight, so clear in his mind, was gone. Each turn led to another dead end. Each new route sank him deeper into the maze. His mouth grew dry, his stomach twisted with hunger, and the beam of his flashlight grew weaker with every step. James curled up on a damp rock, panic gnawing at him. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm, each drop a reminder that time was slipping away. One by one, his flashlights died. The cave swallowed him in complete blackness, the cold cutting through his thin shirt and jeans. Shivering, he felt exhaustion drag at his body. His temperature was dropping fast. Desperate, he scraped together a fire, a weak, sputtering flame. He fed it everything he had left, his shirt, knee pads, even his flashlight batteries. Soon he was left with only pants and sneakers, the cold gnawing at him again.
His skin was raw from scraping against the rock. Hypothermia clouded his mind, twisting his thoughts into strange visions. Climbing over stone roofs, police in pursuit. The hunger, the cold, the fear blurred the line between dream and reality. While James fought the cold and darkness, his friends had no idea how bad things were. They re-entered the cave the next day, spotted his light in the distance, only for him to switch it off and ignore their calls. Assuming he was fine, they left. By Sunday night, his mother reported him missing to the El Paso Sheriff's Department. A search team went in, but 5 hours of combing the tunnels turned up nothing. On Monday around noon, Barney Foster, an experienced caver, heard about the search on TV and took matters into his own hands. The official search was losing steam. James had a history of disappearing for days, but Foster wasn't willing to leave him in the dark. He squeezed through the cave's tightest passages, places few dared to go. In one narrow stretch, he found a flashlight, the first sign. Pushing deeper into the upper rear section of the cave, he entered a small room choked with massive rock slabs. That's when he heard it, a faint cough. James May lay on the cold stone, battered, bruised, and barely conscious. He had burned everything but his pants and sneakers to survive. His body was scraped raw, but he was alive. Foster handed James an energy bar and water, then began the slow, careful journey back to daylight. After 54 hours lost underground, James had survived, but only just. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, severe dehydration, hypothermia, and exhaustion. Doctors admitted him immediately, and he spent weeks recovering. In that time, the cave's lesson sunk in. The darkness had taken his strength, stripped away his arrogance, and left him with a humility nothing else could have taught him.
May 11th, 1990. Deep in the wilderness of Hernando County, Florida, the waters of Deep Sink No. 2 rested silent, hiding one of the most dangerous underwater cave systems in the state. Few divers had reached its limits, where darkness consumed everything and the crushing weight of the abyss pressed against the body. At the water's edge, Michael Spears checked his gear one last time, tightening each strap and inspecting every hose. At just 25, he was confident and eager, though far less experienced than his partner Daniel. Michael had earned his cave diving certification only 5 months earlier, but he had already logged 75 dives. The world beneath the surface fascinated him. Tight passages twisting into endless stone corridors, vast chambers opening like hidden cathedrals. That night, Michael and Daniel prepared for a descent into the lower circuit of Deep Sink. Visibility was poor, the rains had clouded the water, but the danger only fueled their determination. Michael had never entered this site before, and the challenge thrilled him. He wanted to prove he could handle the depths like the veterans he admired. Just a few feet away, Daniel prepared his equipment with calm precision. At 34, he was the seasoned diver, carrying more than a decade of cave experience. He had witnessed accidents before, some minor, others deadly. Cave diving wasn't just skill, it demanded control. One mistake, one rush of panic could seal a diver's fate. "Final check," Daniel said firmly. "You ready?" Michael drew a sharp breath, clutched his regulator, and nodded. "Yeah, let's go." Together they eased into the water, every motion steady and measured. Deep Sink stretched out beneath them like a gateway into another world. The entrance restriction, a narrow tunnel feeding into the main chamber, stood as their first trial. They slipped through with care, headlights cutting through the clouded dark. By the time they entered the junction room, visibility had collapsed. Silt, stirred by heavy rain, spun around them like an underwater storm. Their lights barely pierced beyond their arms. Every movement was cautious as they followed the guideline, a thin rope that was their only lifeline. In total darkness, losing it would be fatal. At the upper circuit line, the water cleared, revealing vast rock structures. They steadied themselves, corrected buoyancy, exchanged the familiar OK hand signal. Michael answered with confidence. He felt steady, ready. Together they pressed onward, descending the lower circuit line, deeper into the cave's heart. Dropping past 200 feet, the pressure became unmistakable. Each breath demanded effort, the air heavy in their lungs. But the danger was invisible. Nitrogen in their tanks seeped into their systems, clouding thought, dulling reflexes, and warping judgment. This was nitrogen narcosis, a silent, creeping haze, like intoxication at the bottom of the earth.
Most divers felt its effects below 130 feet, but beyond 200, it became dangerously unstable. Midway through the circuit, Daniel spotted something wrong. Michael had slipped just below the guideline. Only a few feet at first, but then he sank faster, as though pulled downward by a hidden weight. Daniel stretched out, trying to grab him, but Michael pushed forward, movement sharp and reckless. He was no longer tracking the line, he was driving beyond it. Was he chasing a personal depth milestone? Daniel's pulse quickened. They were already pushing 200, 250 feet, where the pressure crushed in like iron walls. The route would soon arc back toward the junction room, forcing them through the silted maze once again. But then it happened. Near the junction, the clear water collapsed. A heavy cloud of suspended silt rose around them, swallowing everything in darkness. Visibility fell to zero, an endless void. Michael reached for the line, but his hand slid past. He tried again, missed. Panic surged. Disoriented, he turned the wrong way, deeper into the cave instead of toward a stape. When Daniel entered the silt cloud, Michael had vanished. Meanwhile, Michael fought to survive. His chest hammered as he twisted through the darkness, searching for light, a rope, any landmark. The cave closed in around him. Then, a line appeared ahead, drifting in the gloom. He grabbed for it, unaware it led the wrong way. The rope pulled him into the downstream ballroom, a sealed chamber buried in the system. His body strained. At this depth, each breath burned. Carbon dioxide flooded his blood, a deadly effect of overexertion under crushing pressure. The harder he breathed,
the worse it became. His regulator kept delivering air, but it couldn't stop the darkness closing in at the edges of his vision. This was a depth-induced blackout, one of the deadliest killers of deep divers. Then came the final mistake. His buoyancy slipped. His body tilted forward, weight pulling him down. He lost consciousness before ever touching the bottom. Meanwhile, Daniel surfaced. His lungs burned as he endured decompression stops, pausing at set depths to release nitrogen from his blood and avoid decompression sickness, known as the bends. This occurs when a diver rises too fast and nitrogen forms bubbles inside the body. At extreme pressure, nitrogen saturates tissues with every breath. If ascent is rushed, it doesn't escape safely. Bubbles erupt in joints, muscles, and vessels. The effects range from stabbing pain and dizziness to paralysis or even death in its worst form.
To prevent this, divers make decompression stops, pausing at set depths so nitrogen can leave the body safely. Treatment often requires oxygen therapy or a hyperbaric chamber, simulating a slow, controlled ascent. At his 30-foot stop, Daniel hovered, peering into the abyss for Michael. Nothing. The realization hit hard. Something was terribly wrong. When Daniel surfaced, more divers had gathered. They re-entered the cave, tracing the guideline back to the junction room, but Michael was gone. The recovery began at dawn, and elite cave divers assembled, ready for the brutal task ahead. Given the depth and poor visibility, every move had to be precise. 3 teams, recovery divers, decompression specialists, and surface support, coordinated the descent. The cave was immense, and one stir of silt could turn it into a black void. As they pressed deeper, the cold and crushing pressure set in. At 200 feet, they switched to deep gas, eyes fixed on dive computers tracking depth, gas use, and decompression limits. Minutes dragged into hours as teams swept the tunnels. Then, at 241 feet, a diver's beam froze on a still figure. Michael lay face down on the floor, arms slack, regulator in place. His mask was intact, no damage, no panic. He had likely blacked out before he even knew he was in trouble. There were no signs of a fight. His body had simply shut down, drifting to the bottom with half a tank still left. It had taken 7 hours to find him, though they already knew the truth. What they feared was now real. Michael was gone. The rescue team secured his body and began the long ascent. The diving community mourned Michael's loss. He was young, skilled, and driven, sometimes too driven. Friends remembered how he pushed himself, determined to prove he could match the veterans. Experts later concluded nitrogen narcosis and depth-induced blackout, worsened by carbon dioxide from exertion, had likely overtaken him. Losing the guideline sealed his fate. A mixed gas like trimix could have reduced narcosis, but Michael relied on compressed air, deadly beyond 200 feet. It wasn't a single mistake that killed him, but a chain of small errors compounded by the merciless pressure of the deep. Deep Sink had taken another life, and its black waters would hold their silence.
Jonathan Cole, 27, loved the thrill of exploring hidden places. His closest friend, 26-year-old Ferguson Lahar, often joined him underground. They caved before, but this one was different. Its twisting, unpredictable passages promised real danger, and that made it irresistible. Their trip began on a cool morning. Jonathan and Fergus hiked for miles through thick forest and over rugged stone until they reached the cave's mouth, a black opening carved into the cliffside, nearly lost among jagged rock. With headlamps cutting through the dark, they descended into the unknown. At first, the passage was wide enough to walk side by side. Soon it narrowed, forcing single file. The walls pressed closer, slick with moisture, the stone icy beneath their hands. With each step, the cave revealed its true nature, tight, unforgiving, and alive with hidden challenges. The tunnels twisted endlessly, some so narrow they had to turn sideways, stone pressing hard against their ribs. Still, they kept going, fueled by curiosity and the promise of discovery. Hours slipped by as they wormed through the winding rock. Conversation faded. Every ounce of focus went into navigating the shrinking space. Then they reached a fork. 2 narrow routes, one to the left and one to the right. After a quick debate, they chose the left, convinced it led to a hidden chamber others had described. The passage immediately tightened. They dropped to their stomachs, inching forward through the suffocating dark, bodies scraping against the cold stone. The ceiling pressed low, the walls so tight they scraped against their shoulders. Halfway through, Jonathan, leading the way, felt the passage pinch even smaller. He tried pushing forward, but the rock squeezed him still. Backing up was worse. The stone locked him in place. Panic hit hard as he shouted for Ferguson just a few feet behind. His voice echoed, tight and frantic.
Ferguson reached, but the crawl space was too narrow to help. Both men were trapped deep underground. No way ahead, no simple way back. The cave pressed on them like a crushing weight, squeezing the air from Jonathan's chest. Jonathan strained against the rock, muscles burning, but the stone's grip held firm. Each movement sent sharp jolts through his chest and shoulders. Hearing the fear in his friend's voice, Ferguson urged him to stay still, to save his strength. He promised to think of a way out, though the passage left no room to turn, no space to retreat. They were both locked inside a trap carved by the cave itself. Time dragged on. The cold deepened. The dark seemed heavier with every breath. They knew the truth. No one outside knew where they were. Rescue, if possible at all, was far beyond reach. They realized their mistake, ignoring the golden rule of caving. With only two, no one could stay behind while another went for help. In a desperate move, Ferguson tried pushing Jonathan forward, forcing him through the narrowing rock. But the tunnel was merciless, the stone biting deeper. Jonathan screamed as the walls tore at his clothes and skin, the crushing pressure unbearable. Out of options, Ferguson made the hardest choice. He told Jonathan he would try to back out and find help, though the odds were almost non-existent. Jonathan, his voice faint and broken, urged him to go. It was their only chance. With great effort, Ferguson began inching backward through the suffocating passage. Every movement was a battle, and the slow crawl felt endless. By the time he finally emerged from the cave, exhausted, scraped, and disoriented, the sun was already sinking below the horizon. Without wasting a moment, Ferguson contacted the rescue team. The nearest rangers, experienced men who knew the area well, were the first to respond. They gathered their gear and followed Ferguson back into the wilderness, determined to save Jonathan. But the cave's remoteness and the narrow, twisting tunnel made the rescue an uphill battle. Hours had passed since Ferguson had left Jonathan when the rescuers finally reached him. They found him unconscious, still wedged tightly in the unforgiving rock, but miraculously alive. Working carefully, they chipped away at the surrounding stone and secured hooks in place. Their plan was risky. Inject a glycerin solution to make Jonathan's body slippery, then attempt to haul him free with ropes. The pulling went on for what felt like forever, the rescuer straining with every ounce of strength. At last, Jonathan's body shifted, and with one final effort, he slid free from the tunnel's grip. He was rushed to the hospital, where weeks of recovery awaited him. But against all odds, Jonathan had survived the ordeal that nearly claimed his life.